Hi everyone. So for the month of August, we're going to be looking at another game from the World Cup. It was in the finals of the World Cup between Jan-Krzyztof Duda and Sergey Karjakin. This is their second game of the match, and the first one they drew. So the game started with d4, and Karjakin decided to play a semi-Tarash defense, but I'm not that familiar with this opening, so I can't give as much insight. Okay, so white takes on d5, and I guess the normal replies are just taking back, but black decided to take on d4 first. And I'm sure he prepared this line or knows it, but I feel like white already has a slight lead in development here, and black has an isolated pawn as well. So white should be slightly better. So white decides to put early pressure on the d5 pawn instead of castling quickly, because he doesn't know where really to put this light squared bishop yet. And black's continuing to defend the d5 pawn. Bishop b5. If white put the bishop on e2, then black would play queen b6 to generate counterplay on the queen side. A sample line would be queen c2, knight e4, takes, and if white trades this, then his queenside pawns will fall. So bishop b5, queen b6. And white decides to trade on f6 here and kind of simplify the position, because black was threatening a6 to kick the bishop back and take the b2 pawn. So black does manage to recapture the pawn back on b2, but white's pieces are better placed in this case because of white's central rook. And here Duda plays a good move. He plays king e2 instead of castling, the normal castling. So the idea with king e2 is that in any case that both players trade queens, then white's king will be marginally better placed than black's because it's already in the center, whereas black's has to move will have to take a couple of moves. And it's relatively safe on e2 as well, because, well, I mean, there's no way to really penetrate on e3, and white has almost full control of the d file. So black drops his bishop back because white had a potential threat of rook b1, followed by the discovery on the queen. So black drops his bishop back, white doubles on the d file, and black continues with rook c8. So the reason black didn't play rook d8 is because white can take on c6. And if pawn takes, then white would trade the rooks and achieve a better endgame here because of the weak queenside pawns that black has. And generally a queen and knight is better, like a pure queen and knight is better than a queen and bishop with no other pieces on the board, because the knight offers abilities that the queen doesn't have. Whereas the bishop, the queen already has that, like, ability to travel diagonally. So white has better chances to, like, be able to control both colors, both square colors. Anyways, knight d4 is the best, and c5 isn't possible because of the mate. So black has to try to create counterplay with queen b2, and even if white trades the queens here, he's much better as well. Actually, I think queen c2 is the best, because after white trades the queens, then his king will be able to march forward. His knight always has a target on c6, and white is just much better here. He's playing for only 2 results. He can't really lose in this position. Okay, if black took on c6 with the queen, then white would trade queens as well, and then play rook d7. So white has control over the 7th rank now and can start attacking black's pawns. So after this pawn moves, then white can get behind the pawns as well. The reason white can't take on a7 because his rook is hanging, so yeah. Anyways, trading the queens is the best option here. So anyways, black played rook c8. And here white plays another good move. He plays bishop c4, dropping the bishop back to a better diagonal and aiming to target the f7 pawn. Because here the bishop has already done its job to pressure the knight earlier, to pressure the center earlier and attack the knight. So Duda plays a good move, which is bishop c4. With a potential rook d7 coming up to pressure f7. Queen b4 is what black played. Black is trying to trade the queens so that it will be easier to defend. He will be able to defend the endgame rather than this middle game, which is potentially dangerous for him. White plays queen b3, which is the best move. He doesn't want to take on b4, obviously, because he's going to lose material after knight takes b4. And his bishop and rook are both being attacked, and there's no way to save both. So white would lose material here. But after queen b3, white is still offering to trade queens, but with much better conditions. And he is still attacking, or threatening to attack f7 with rook d7. So black trades. There was one other option that was still playable, which is queen e7, to not trade queens, but after rook d7, queen e8, bishop d3 looks very bad for black. The reason why white can't take on b7 with the rook is because of knight a5, or with the queen is also because of knight a5. So, but after bishop d3, he renews the threat of taking on b7 and is eyeing for the king side as well. Or he can bring his bishop to f5 or play g4. And black can never take the rook because of bishop h7. Okay, so black decided to trade the queens. White dropped his bishop back to take the queen. And here black played knight b8. So the reason black played knight b8 was to cover the d7 square and prevent white from playing with d7. The move looks like, to be honest, the move looks not that good or bad, but there wasn't many attractive options for black either. For example, if black tried to contest the default, then white would just play rook d7. And if b6, then rook c7. As you can see, the rook here is pressuring both queenside pawns while also pressuring f7 with the bishop. So this d7 square is very useful for white. Knight b8. So now white finds another means of improving his position. He plays g4. So he has his pieces, most of his pieces in optimal squares basically. His rooks are doubled, his bishop is good here, pressuring f7, his knight is pretty good here. It's not in the best spot, but he can't really move it either, otherwise black will trade, or here. So yeah, white decides to create more space for himself while also threatening to push black's bishop back farther. As black's bishop is quite good on this diagonal, it's kind of restricting white's knight, because obviously white does not want to trade here. The more pieces he has to work with, because he wants to keep the pieces on to maximize his winning chances. h6, h4, g6, g5, takes, bishop e7. If bishop g7, white would play knight h4. And knight h4 threatens to capture on g6. For example, if black ignores it, then white will take, play rook d7. If rook f7, then white is just winning. King here, then rook h1. It's going to be mate. So knight h4 is a very big threat. Rook c6 is black's best move basically, and white will follow it up with f4, threatening f5. And if white's knight gets to f5, then it's very bad for black. The knight can jump to e7 and threaten mate as well. There's also g6. Like after black captures on f5, obviously, then white can also play g6. So yeah, that's why black decided to play bishop e7. It prepares for knight h4, because then black will just play king g7, and it's not really a big deal. The downside with bishop e7 compared to bishop g7 is that the bishop no longer controls the diagonal and these key squares on it. And Duda spots a tactic that he can use to take advantage of this. He plays rook e5 to attack the bishop. And rook e5 may not seem like a good move because of knight c6, which is the obvious counter, but knight c6 is actually what Duda was hoping for, because after knight c6 he plays rook d7, which is another amazing move. It's much better than dropping the rook back to e4. Okay, why is rook d7 so good? If black takes the rook on e5, which is the first option that white had to calculate, then white will capture back. And here he has done an exchange, but he has a lot of threats. He has this threat. He has this threat. The black rook has to continue watching f7. And bishop takes g5 is an option, but after knight takes g6, white's gonna recapture his exchange back with more than what he sacrificed at the start. So if black plays b6, then white will take on a7, and here he is up a pawn. But after rook b7, black can defend the pawn, but it's just very passive for him. This position is pretty much losing because white's rook here is pressuring f7 and can also pressure the b pawn. So black's rook is basically just stuck here, and white has an extra pawn as well, so he can push up like this. Another option for white is to take on f7 with the rook, and black pretty much has to trade the rooks, otherwise like king h8, this is just very bad. But after he trades the rooks, white is attacking the bishop while also threatening knight d6. So obviously black doesn't want to lose the rook, but after he loses the bishop, then white will have a bishop and a knight for a rook, and this endgame should be winning, although it might be a slower grind to win. Okay, so black Karjakin didn't want to accept any of those endgames because they're both worse for him, and he plays bishop d8. Okay, now white moves the rook, plays rook b5, which double attacks b7. Black defends both with knight a5, and knight a5 is a mistake. b6 was more natural, but after bishop d5, white should be much better. Basically threatening to take on c6 and then a7. But Karjakin played knight a5. And there is a quite simple tactic here that gives white a huge advantage. It's rook takes d8, eliminating the defender of the knight, and once black takes back, then white's just going to take the knight, and he has a bishop and a knight for a rook. So this should be probably easily winning for Jan-Krzyztof Duda. It's quite surprising that he didn't find it and he played bishop d5 instead. Okay, bishop d5 is still one of the best moves in the position. It's attacking b7, and he centralizes his bishop. Rook c7, and white has another tactic here because the rook left the defense of the bishop here. He used to defend the bishop. White has a tactical shot with bishop takes f7. King g7. If rook takes, then rook takes e8, followed by rook takes here. King g7, rook takes, bishop d5. And here black resigned. It's because white's position is practically winning, just even though he's up a pawn, because of how badly placed white's pieces are, and white will possibly win more material with knight d4, knight e6, followed by pushing these pawns. White's pieces are just much more dominant in this position, and Karjakin just decided to throw in the towel. I was actually quite surprised that Karjakin resigned this early, but it's also kind of understandable considering that black can't really do much. He doesn't really have much options. White is currently threatening to take on b7, so b6 is the natural move, but after b6 there's no way that the knight is ever going to get back in the game as long as white's bishop is here. And white can easily support the bishop with e4. So after b6, for example, knight e4, it's very bad for black. After knight e6 or f4, but the immediate threat is knight e6. So I hope you enjoyed the analysis for the August game. And I will see you guys next month.